Hello everyone and welcome to the HTangl V2 disassembly video. In this video I'm going to walk you through how to completely disassemble this controller as well as how to install a Brook board. There are only 3 tools that you will need to fully disassemble this controller. The first being a 3mm hex key, or sometimes called an Allen wrench. This is included with your controller. The next piece is a combination key switch and keycap puller or removal tool. The wire side here is for taking off keycaps, and this tweezer looking thing is for taking out switches. And then the last tool is going to be a Phillips head screwdriver. This will be for the PCB screws. It does need to be a somewhat small screwdriver. I believe this is a Phillips head 1 to be specific, but let's get right into it. So the first thing, and probably the most common thing that you will ever do to disassemble this, is to take the keycaps off. If you ever want to change your keycap colors, these are just standard MX keycaps. It comes with DSA profile caps, but you can put any normal keyboard keycap. Frame 1 caps unfortunately do not work because they are too large. The spacing between especially these rows as well as the C-stick cluster are just too close together to accommodate those larger caps. But any standard keycap that'll fit on a standard mechanical keyboard will fit on this. So to remove these keycaps, we're just going to take this wire side of our keycap removal tool, and you slot the top and bottom wire over the keycap like so, and then just pull straight up. I usually like to hang on to this keycap as I'm pulling up, because if you don't, you just insert the wires and pull straight up, sometimes that keycap can kind of fly off. So I just kind of put my finger on top while I'm pulling up. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of these off. Now that we have our keycaps removed, you can see the switches underneath. I have a couple Kale silver switches. This is my personal controller. The stock switch will be a Gatoron clear, so these stems will not be silver. They'll be more of a clear color. And then also worth noting, you do not need to remove the top acrylic panels in order to take those keycaps off, as I've just demonstrated. You can get those wires in without having to take these off. That being said, you will need to remove these top panels to take the switches out. There isn't quite enough room for this key switch puller to get in there to properly take these out. Some of them are okay, like especially the right hand cluster here isn't too bad. I can get this tool in and pull these switches out, but it is much easier to do this if you just take the top panels off. So I'm going to do that now, and to do that we need our 3mm hex key / Allen wrench. And we have 6 screws here around the top. I'm just going to go through and loosen all of these and remove them. Okay, with all those screws removed, our 2 top acrylic panels will just come right off. And at this point, if you are looking to add art to your HTangl, this is all of the disassembly required. Those keycaps will have to be removed, as well as this top panel. You would cut the cutouts out of your art piece so that it fits over these switches, as well as these holes here. Put that on, and then put your acrylic panels back on. I have a separate video explaining specifically how to make art for this, so I won't get too much into that. But now that we have those top panels off, I have direct access to all of these switches. And to take off this switch plate, you'll notice that it doesn't come off. Even if I flip this upside down, it will not come off. And the reason for that is these switches are actually clipped into this switch plate and then pushed into the PCB, and they're being held in by the PCB underneath. So what we need to do to get this switch plate off is to remove these switches. You can take the switch plate off without removing the switches, but I don't recommend it because it is somewhat difficult to, first of all, to pull the switch plate off, and then also to push it back in without damaging any of the switches. So I definitely recommend removing these. The way to do that is to take the other side of your switch removal tool here, this tweezer looking side. We have 2 clips, and on our switches we have a clip at the bottom and the top of the switch. So I'm just going to insert my tweezers to the top and bottom, squeeze, hold the controller down, then pull straight up. You do want to get a somewhat decent hold on this. If you hold too lightly when you pull these out, they can kind of go flying. That being said, you don't want to, Hulk grip it or anything, but just a decent firm grip so that when you pull up, this switch doesn't go flying. So I'm going to take all of these switches out. Okay, now that we have all the switches removed, this switch plate will just come right off. There's nothing else holding it in place. So we'll take that off and set it aside. And now we have access to our PCB. Now there's not much to look at here on the top. All of the main components as well as the Brook board are on the bottom side. Now to take out this PCB completely, we have 4 screws, 2 here and 2 here holding this in. And this is where our Phillips head screwdriver comes in. So we're going to remove those 4 screws. Now with those screws removed, to remove this PCB, it's a little bit tricky because we have our nunchuck port here on the side that actually goes through the case. So what I do is I take my hex key and kind of slot it into this empty area over here, pull up on this side, the side without the nunchuck, just so you have the lip up, and then pull up and then pull to the side to get this nunchuck port to pull out. You don't want to just pull straight up because then you're flexing this port over here. And then once you pull to the side, don't just pull it straight up. We have a wire here running to our GC port, so we're going to take that and just flip it outwards like so. I'm going to set that on top here so we can see it. And you don't need to disconnect the GC wires. I intentionally made these somewhat long so that you have some wiggle room here to move the PCB around. So we're going to leave these connected. But as you can see, there is a screw terminal here. This is a 5-pin terminal just because that's what I had, but there's actually only 4 wires connected to it, and you need a very small flathead screwdriver in order to remove these wires. But that is done in the effort to make these GameCube ports easy to replace, and I'll get more into that in just a second here. So let's take a look at what's on here. Basically, we have our hot swap sockets, which are these black pieces right here. We have our logic converter. This is for basically converting voltages so that this works on a GameCube/Wii. We have our main USB-C port, and this is for connecting to a PC as well as GC/Wii/switch on a GC adapter. And then this USB port is specifically dedicated for our Brook board. Now, yours will not have the Brook board pre-installed. I have one in here for testing purposes, so yours will look like this with just an empty spot right here. And then down here we have our Arduino, which is basically the brain of the controller, allows it to communicate with the console as well as PC, and then our nunchuck port over here. So while we're here and while I'm talking about the Brook board, basically to install a Brook board, once you've gotten to this point, it's as simple as just pushing it into these pin headers here. There are 2 pin banks, one right here, this is for the buttons, and then this 4-pin pin bank, which connects here, is for the USB port on the Brook board, so that it can communicate through this USB port instead of the onboard USB port. So to install a Brook board, all you have to do is line these pins up, and you'd usually look at it from the side while you're doing this. You line up the pins, hard to do without seeing them, and then just push straight down. Make sure that both this pin header here, as well as this 4-pin header here, is fully inserted. You don't have to push very hard, just look at it from the side and make sure that those are all the way into these little pin headers on the main board. And once that's pushed in, that's it, your Brook board is installed. And if that's all you were disassembling this for, you'd be good to completely reassemble at this point. But I want to go over a couple more things while we have this open. So the GameCube port, as I was talking about previously, is connected using the screw terminals. And to remove this GameCube port, if it ever needs to be replaced due to damage or whatever, there is a little clip here that holds it from sliding out the back. So we need to remove that clip first. You just pull straight up, it should come out fairly easily. And then push on the front of the GameCube port into the case, and it should push out like that. And it's a little hard to get your fingers on it. I recommend using your pinky. Probably wouldn't use the hex key just because you don't want to bend those pins in there, but just something small and blunt to push it the rest of the way out. And now that we have that out, you can see that's just a regular GameCube port. And because of that, these are easily replaceable. If you ever damage one, I will send you a new one for free. So, if the pins wear out or it somehow, something gets in there, easy to replace. And then you just undo these screw terminals and the wires come right out. This is the case as it stands with no PCB or switch plate or top panels. 3D printed. We have a couple heat inserts here, which are made of metal, so that you can unscrew and rescrew these as many times as you'd like without having to damage them. These are extremely secure. I did many tests when I first started putting these in to make sure that they do not pull out easily. So, even if you put a screw in there and you take a pair of pliers and try to rip them out, they will not come out of these. They are melted into the plastic, so it's not just held in with glue or anything. It's actually kind of fused to the body of the case. But that is pretty much it. There's not really any other disassembly required. If you do need to replace anything on this board, the USB ports, these are all held on with female pin headers, so they just slot right out. Yours will most likely have some hot glue on them. On all of the boards, I just added a little hot glue to the sides just to be on the safe side so that there's no chance of these like wiggling their way out or anything or being moved from just being plugged and plugged in. That hot glue comes off fairly easily with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol if you do need to replace those. And same deal with the GameCube port. If you do need a replacement, if this USB port wears out for any reason, I'm happy to send you a new one. So all of these parts are just super easy to pop out and replace. Even the Arduino here just pops out of these headers. So the main idea there is just, if any component dies on this, super easy to swap out. The only thing that is permanently soldered would be the nunchuck port and these hot swap sockets, which unfortunately there's no way around that. Those have to be soldered to the board, but everything else is easy to pop out and replace. So with all that being said, let's reassemble this. The first thing I want to do is get my GameCube port back in place. And to do that, we're going to kind of set our board here. Now it needs to go in with the flat side facing the bottom of the case. So we're going to line that up and just push it back in. Make sure it goes all the way in. Make sure we put our little clip back in. Not sure what that looks like. Maybe some kind of character from a game. I don't know. We'll get that reinserted right in the back here to keep that GameCube port from pushing out so that when you plug it in, it doesn't just pop out. And then when we reinsert this board, we want to get our nunchuck in first, just the same way we kind of tilted it and then pulled it out. We're going to do the same thing but backwards. So we're going to slot that in. And then this wire for the GameCube port, we're going to push it off to the side here so that it doesn't get in the way. I'm going to just kind of hold this to the side, drop that PCB back in. This little center post should go through the hole. That's what centers it and keeps it from moving around, as well as the screws, which we are about to reinstall. Make sure that this cable for the GameCube port does not get stuck on this little ledge right here. You want to make sure it's pushed off to the side and that this is fully pushed all the way down and flat. And now, once we have this back in, we can just put our 4 screws back in. These screws do not need to be incredibly tight, but just firm. Again, those heatset inserts are very secure, but we don't want to put a ton of pressure on this PCB. So just finger tight and you should be good to go. Now that we've got that back in, let's put our switch plate back on. Just sets in place there. And then we want to reinstall our switches. Now to reinstall our switches, we are going to take a switch and we want these pins on the back of the switch to insert into the black holes on these. The silver holes are unrelated. They are just for wiring on the board. So we want these pins to be oriented like so, facing towards the bottom of the controller. There is a cutout slot on your switch that should face towards the top. So it'll look basically just like this. And a note on reinserting these: this pin closest to the edge of the switch is somewhat fragile. And when you're inserting it, you need to make sure that this stays completely straight And I recommend checking each of your switches, looking at them from the side, and make sure that this pin is perfectly straight before you reinsert it. They bend very easily, so you can just kind of bend it with your finger. Make sure it's straight. And then we go to reinsert the switch, make sure that it lines up, and then just push straight down, and it should slot right in. And we do that with all of the rest of the switches. I usually do the corner ones first so that the plate is aligned correctly. So I'll do like this one. Perfect. Checking that pin at the edge to make sure it's straight. This one looks good. And once I have those ones in, all the rest of the pins will be aligned, and I can go ahead and reinsert the rest of the switches. Okay, now that I have all of my switches reinserted, I can put the top panel back on and get the screws back in. But just wanted to make a quick note, if you are putting new switches or just, reassembling this, might not be a bad idea to now test the controller at this point to make sure that all of your switches are good. If you bent a pin while reinserting any of those switches, then it will not register. So if you plug it in and just press all the buttons really quick, make sure everything works, you can see right away, did one of the switch pins get bent? Better to do it now rather than when you have it fully reassembled, because then you might have to take the top panel back off if you can't get your little switch puller tool back in there. So definitely recommend testing it, especially if you're putting in brand new switches that you haven't used before. But assuming they all work, then we can get our top panel back on, get our screws back in, and our keycaps. So I'm going to get my acrylic here, and we'll pop that back on, get it lined up, and take my screws here and put those back in. I'm just going to get them started by hand. I like to put all of them in before tightening them, just to make sure that everything's aligned properly. They should go in very easily. If you're having trouble getting a screw to go back in, it's most likely misaligned, and I would recommend taking some of them out, realigning your panel, and re-screwing them. Some of these will be a little bit stiffer than others. The alignment of the heat set inserts to the top panel is not always exactly perfect. So you may need to, like I said, kind of hand tighten these, shift the panel a little bit, and then tighten them again. But you shouldn't really have many issues with it. Just worth mentioning if yours has one screw that's a little bit, tiny bit off center. And so now that I have these all started by hand, I'm going to go around with my hex key and tighten them. We don't want to over tighten these because you're pulling directly down on these acrylic layers. So I recommend just using the longer side instead of using the shorter side and kind of cranking them down. Use the shorter side and just only use about 2 fingers worth of pressure to get these tightened. So just like that, just my finger and my thumb, just gently applying some pressure. You don't want them loose, just not super over tightened is all. Okay, with our screws back in, the only thing left to do is to reinstall the keycaps. This is by far the easiest part. Just a quick note on these keycaps, and this is all keyboard keycaps, not just these. If you go to put it back on, and all you have to do is just align this little plus symbol here with the plus symbol on the switch, and then push straight down. If it doesn't want to go in easily, it doesn't just slide on, look for a little dot around the outer edge of the keycap. You're most likely not going to see it on camera because it's very, very small, but there'll be a very small kind of imperfection in the plastic, like a little circle. It's where the injection molding happened. If you look for that dot and you align it to either the bottom side or the top side, so right now I have this little dot here facing towards the bottom, and push, it'll just go straight on super easily. The alternate method to looking for this little dot is just try to push it on. If it doesn't go on, spin it once like so and then push it on, and it'll go on super easily. So either way, just basically trying to say that they should go on very easily. You shouldn't really have to force them on, is all. So I'm going to push the rest of these on. Okay, with all of our with all of our keycaps reinstalled, I like to go around and just press on every single key to make sure that they are all pushed all the way on. And with those back on, that's pretty much it. Your controller is fully reassembled, ready to go. That's it for disassembly. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on Discord. Check the YouTube page for other tutorials. I have another tutorial on how to make art for this, how to prep it and install it. So if you're curious, you can take a look at that. That is pretty much it. Thanks for watching.